Folks, we've just had the news that there is epic empowerment finally on its way to the game, and as you can probably imagine, or as you've probably seen on YouTube, every single content creator is going crazy with this newfound free content that we can just push out and say, these are the best champions to empower, these are the top epics. Everybody's doing it. I'm going to join the party. These are my top 25 epics in the game. This is going to be specifically based around the empowerment function, so there are definitely going to be epics on this list that are amazing champions. I will just spoil it a little bit here. Somebody like a Geomancer did not actually make it onto this list whatsoever, even though he is debatably the best epic in the game, and that is because I don't think he's going to benefit a whole lot from empowerment. Most of the time that Geomancer is being built, he's being built on an unkillable or block damage team anyways, and on top of that, you're not really building him with high speeds or incredibly high accuracies in most situations, and you're certainly not using him in PvP, so there's not really a reason that he's going to benefit from empowerment. And on a top 25 champion list, I want to make sure that each champion listed on here is actually going to benefit from this function, so that if you're saving duplicates, there's a reason for it. So let's go ahead and start with the Sven Watchers. The first champion is a fantastic epic. I'm on my free-to-play, by the way, so all of these champions are going to show as not acquired, but I do actually have most of them, if not all of them. Mist-Rider, Daithi, quick overview. He has an increased attack and accuracy on himself with an extra turn, AoE decreased defense with an extra turn if it's placed, and attacking one enemy, removing a buff, and a 20% chance of an extra turn. So overall, he's basically just a inbuilt relentless kit on steroids. Absolutely fantastic champion. He obviously brings the decreased defense debuff, and he brings a crap ton of damage on top of that as well. So a very, very good champion, and an accuracy in all battles by 40%. So he's coming in at number 25. These are in no particular order, by the way, so that is apart from the number 1 champion, which definitely deserves to be there. We'll see who it is, though. Priodin is going to be the next champion, so A1 attacks an enemy 3 times, has a 35% chance of placing a freeze on each hit, which is pretty cool. AoE, 65% chance of a freeze for 1 turn, and an increased speed and filling the speed of all, the turn meter of all allies by 15%. And then additionally, he's filling his own turn meter by 5% for each freeze debuff placed by himself. This guy is basically a specialist made for the hard Fire Knight. Because you're using him in hard Fire Knight, and because of how high those stat requirements are, this guy would certainly benefit from being empowered, or, you know, a couple duplicates of him on the team at the very, very least. Next up, we're going to head over here. We're going to head into the Shadowkin. Now, this one might be a little bit contentious, depending on who you think deserves to be on here. So my first pick would be Oboro. I did actually go ahead and make a video about her recently. She is a fantastic champion. Attacks one enemy, 50% chance of a decreased defense. Will attack all enemies instead if the target is under 4 or more debuffs. This has a crazy multiplier on both the single target and the AoE. She attacks one enemy 2 times. Second hit has a chance of transferring all debuffs from her to the target. First hit has a chance of stealing all buffs if she's under a veil or perfect veil. A3, placing an increased crit rate and increased crit damage on herself for 2 turns. Then she attacks somebody. She places a perfect veil on herself for 2 turns if it's critical, and on her passive she gets a revive on death anytime she gets a veil or perfect veil, and it lasts for 3 turns. And this has no cooldown, so you can basically have infinite revive on death as long as you have her veiled or perfect veiled, which is fantastic. And then an ally attack in dungeons by 33%. Fantastic champion. My Orboru is a baseline, fully awakened on my main account, and I had her doing 230 million damage essentially in Hydra. I did make a video breaking it down there, of course. You can go and check out that video on my channel. The next champion is actually going to be Turagi the Frog. Turagi the Frog is going to have this Bog Blessing where he places a shield equal to 15% of his max HP and an ally protection on all allies except this champion for 2 turns. And he heals himself by 25% and places a Reflect damage. And then this heal increases by 2.5% for each poison debuff on the enemy team. He's placing his own poisons when he's attacked. He's placing a Provoke, and he's placing a decreased attack. This guy is fantastic for pretty much anywhere in the game, and the reviews will reflect that. He is fantastic. Having a champion like this get even more tanky with the empowerment would be very, very good. He already has 21k base HP, which is sensational. And that is it for Shadowkins. Now, you could make the argument that there's a lot more champions in here that probably deserve to be empowered, like Nagoro, for example, or Hotatsu, but on, again, the 25 top list, we don't have a whole lot of wiggle room. So inside the Dwarves, we have Melga Steelgirdle, another champion that I am a big fan of. I did a guide on her recently. A1 has a 75% chance of removing a random debuff. She has a small library required here on the A1, of course. A2 placing a shield on all allies, and then also a continuous heal. And then she brings a 2 ally revive with 20% HP and 20 turn meter, and a shield equal to 30% of their max HP, and then HP in all battles by 15%. She's not an amazing reviver. She's very good for faction wars, and she is fantastic in a lot of areas of City of Centrano, so you can definitely get some use out of her there, I would say, which is why she's on this list. When it comes to the Dwarves as well, she's pretty much the only reviver inside the faction, apart from, of course, Molly Tankard, but if you have Molly Tankard, you're probably not using Melga anyways. And so we do have a few from this faction. Next up is going to be Morog. This is a champion I don't actually have on either of my accounts, but she attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit will ignore shield. Her damage is based on defense. Attacks all enemy, placing a strengthen buff on all allies for 2 turns. This is on a 3-turn cooldown. And she's going to team up with 2 random allies to attack a single enemy. And it grants an extra turn if any enemy is killed, which is fantastic. So, and then she also counterattacks when hit under a strengthen buff placed by this champion. So she's basically counterattacking, throwing out some big hits. This is actually a very, 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 very good counterattack. Why is that? Well, if you look at somebody like Cardiel, who's debatably one of the best ally attackers in the game, if an enemy is killed, it decreases the cooldown of his ally attack by 1 turn. This is going to decrease the cooldown of every single one of her skills by 1 turn. So that's helping you rotate around to her A2 as well. And overall, you're just going to get a lot more damage out of this champion. And since she is a damage dealer, of course, she is going to benefit from the empowerment. Next up, we have Demitha. Demitha is used in so many areas. A1 attacks one enemy 2 times, each hit placing a shield equal to 10% of her HP on the ally with the lowest HP. A2 increasing the duration of all ally buffs, decreasing the duration of all ally debuffs by 1 turn, and then she heals, and she heals even more depending on the amount of buffs and debuffs. And then she places a block damage for 1 turn and a continuous heal for 2 turns. This is what makes her super, super useful because it's on a 3-turn cooldown. She is in so many unkillable clan boss teams and Iron Twins. Overall, she's going to benefit an absolute ton from empowerment. Her stats are already quite strong with almost 1,300 base defense and almost 19,000 base HP. So if you get her empowered and get her even more tanky with more speed, she's going to be so easy to build and so useful in so many areas of the game that there's not really any way that you can deny that she's going to be the way to go for empowerment. Next up, inside the Knights Revenant, we have 2 champions, and this is going to be a contentious one. Come for me in the comments, I dare you, okay? We have Rector Droth as the #1 pick. She has almost 1,100 defense, 109 base speed, and 17,000 HP. She has a lot of very, very good stuff in her kit, so she's healing everybody, placing a perfect veil if they have full HP, and a continuous heal if they have less than full HP. She brings a revive with 60% HP and 60% turn meter, and a perfect veil. And then she has a decreased attack on the A1, plus she's healing everybody under a veil or perfect veil whenever they get a turn by 10% of their max HP. And she's also increasing the resistance of those allies by 50, which is actually pretty crazy, especially if you're trying to use her in areas like Doom Tower and whatnot. So this is a fantastic champion. And the other one, and this is where people are going to get upset because there's only one other epic that I picked for, being worth empowering inside the Knight Revenant faction, and that is going to be Skullcrown, of all people. Why is this? Well, Skullcrown has an A1 that attacks all enemies, placing an extra hit if they have more than 50% HP. She's an absolute blast of an A2, which attacks all enemies with a 75% chance of placing the big version of a weaken. But her passives are really what makes her crazy, so she places an unkillable on herself for 1 turn every time she drops below 20% HP, and she also revives with 30% HP if Sinesha is on the same team. And then, of course, she has an ally speed in arena battles by 23%, so this champion could be fantastic for your arena, considering that she goes unkillable as well. She could be something like a very, very budget Leorius as well, which would be fantastic, and she does actually smack pretty hard on her A2 there. So Definitely think she's going to be worth empowering. And then, of course, getting those extra speed stats, the extra attack stats, and all that sort of good stuff on her would be a very, very good way to go as well, considering that she is going to be a nuker. Onwards to the Dark Elves. We have one champion. One. There is so many epics inside the Dark Elves, and I only had one that I deemed worthy of empowerment, and it's mainly because she is the thumbnail gal. That is, of course, going to be Madame Saris, a champion that I still don't have on either of my accounts yet, unfortunately. Why is she so good? Attacks one enemy, 20% chance of placing a fear, increases to 30% if they're under 1 debuff, and increases to 45% if they're under 2 or more debuffs. A2 attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of stealing 1 random buff, places a block debuffs on all allies for 2 turns if any buff is stolen, and places a true fear for 1 turn on enemies who have buffs stolen. And then her big money skill is going to be Midnight Ritual, removing all buffs from enemies, placing a decreased attack buff and a decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. If you started early on in the game like me, you would know that she was basically in every single arena match. She was being used in a lot of PvP content as well. Sorry, PvE content to try and set up your nukers and everything like that. She has been power crept a ton, but I do still think that she is very, very good at what she does, where she's stripping off all those buffs, especially somewhere like a City of Centranos as well. Having her remove all buffs without actually touching the enemies is very good, because you don't have to worry about any sort of affinity matchups or anything like that, even though she is void. The other thing to mention with this champion too is she helps to counter something like reaction, again because she is not touching the enemies, she's not attacking them, she's just simply removing all buffs. So somebody who is hitting into reaction or something like that, there's some conditional debuffers where it has to be a critical to place a decreased defense and those sorts of things. She helps to alleviate that. Again, Polymorph has unfortunately kind of countered her, but she still does make it into the list. We have Undead Hordes. Now this one is probably going to be a little bit contentious as well. So we have 2 champions inside here, which is going to be Seeker. Seeker is fantastic for Clan Boss and a bunch of other teams. A1 attacks 1 enemy 2 times, has a 35, 45, 50% chance of placing a provoke. A2 fills the turn meter of all allies by 30%, places a big version of increased attack and grants an extra turn, and then heals himself by 20% HP and places the big version of increased defense when he's hit with a critical hit. So he can be very useful for something like Arena. Give me one moment here to pause and grab a drink. Alright, we're good to keep going. Fantastic champion overall. And the other epic that I think would benefit from empowerment is actually going to be Vogoth. Vogoth has very decent base stats with 19,000 base HP and 1,200 defense. This is basically the skill here that you're worried about. So whenever he's attacked, heals all allies by 50% of the damage received, only heals by 25% of the damage received on boss attacks. And then also he has a provoke and a decrease attack. He's also placing a leech when he's attacked, and if they're under a provoke, he also has a 100% chance of increasing the cooldown of a random skill by 1 turn, which is pretty crazy. This guy is insane overall, so he definitely deserves to be empowered if you have him. He's actually one of the very few champions that I have a duplicate built of as well, so take that as you will. After Vogoth, we are moving on over to the Demonspawn faction, which there are 2 in here, and you can probably guess who they are. So first of all, it's going to be Magnar. Magnar is a fantastic champion, 100 base speed, 21,000 almost base HP, and he is one of the hardest hitting epics in the game, certainly the hardest hitting HP epic in the game. And in terms of HP nukers overall, he's definitely, I would say, still probably top 5. So that's on this skill right here. So again, getting this guy empowered, getting that extra speed, resistance, crit damage, and HP is going to be so beneficial for him. If you have an extra Magnar, I'd recommend just going ahead and empowering him. And the other champion that we have here is going to be Allure. So Allure, she's really known for her A1, attacking 3 times at random, decreasing the target's turn meter by 25% on each critical hit. There's no chance of this, it just happens, so you have to just go ahead and build her out with crit rate and you're good to go. She is pretty squishy, 793 on the defense and 14,000 on the HP. Very, very squishy actually, so getting her empowered and getting some extra defensive stats on there would be very good as well. Absolute carry for Fire Knight. Basically one of her and the Fire Knight shield does not go back up. We're moving on to the Orcs. I'm sure people are going to get on my case for my picks inside this faction, but here we go. So the only pick inside this faction is going to be Seer. Seer is going to benefit on her karma burn by having increased crit damage, and that's about it. I couldn't justify myself really empowering any of the rest of these champions. You might be able to argue for Tagore. You might be able to argue for somebody like a Duke, but I just really couldn't bring myself to put them on the list. Again, this is a top 25, so we have to be very, very stingy with which champions make it. That being said, inside the Skinwalkers, we have Basher. Basher is known for his A2, where he attacks all enemies, increasing the cooldown of all of the target skills by 2 turns. And then he has a block buffs, and he has a weaken on the A1. Fantastic champion for use in the arena. He's a very budget warlord or Yumiko if you're trying to get that function. He has 95 base speed, so empowering this guy is going to be fantastic. Getting some extra speed, accuracy, HP, all that sort of good stuff is going to go a long ways. The next one is one of my favorite damage dealers inside the game, which is actually going to be Fane, the mouse lady here. A3, attacking one enemy 3 times. The first hit having a 100% chance when booked of placing a decreased defense. The second hit places the weaken, and the third hit heals her by 4% of her max HP for every debuff on the target. And then A2 attacks one enemy, has a 100% chance placing a 2, 5% poisons, and a decreased attack. And then the A1 attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 50% chance of stealing 5% of the target's turn meter. So that's a steal as well, not just reducing it, which is quite nice. After Fane, we're going to go ahead and move on over here to the Lizardman faction. Inside Lizardman, the champion that we're empowering is going to be Venomage. Venomage is known to be soloing a lot of content. Enemies under heal reductions inflict 15% less damage, is an absolutely crazy passive. She brings her own heal reduction, so attacks all enemies, 100% chance placing a heal reduction for 3 turns. Also a 100% chance placing 2 5% poison debuffs for 2 turns. Decrease defense and decrease attack on the A2 as well. Granted, it is going to be a single target skill. And in an A1, destroying the target's max HP by 75% of the damage inflicted, and then also has a 50% chance of activating up to 2 poison debuffs on the target. So a fantastic champion overall here. As you can see, the reviews certainly agree with that as well. That is actually the only champion inside the Lizardman that I would recommend empowering. You could easily argue for somebody like a Scathix or somebody like a Broadmaw, but at the end of the day, if you have duplicates of them, you're probably better using them in some other areas, like Faction Guardians, for example. Inside the Ogren tribes, we have Ugo. Definite candidate for empowerment, of course. A1 placing a leech, A2 placing a decreased defense and a block buffs, and A3 removing all heal reduction and then healing and removing a random debuff. It's insane. If all allies are dead, this is going to revive them instead with 50% HP and 50% turn meter. And then she actually gets an increased speed and block damage for 1 turn whenever her last living ally is killed. So useful in arena if you put her in a last slot or something like that. She can be an AoE reviver for you as well. Decent base stats. Getting her empowered is going to make her more tanky, give her more accuracy. We were using this champion in a lot of late game areas like Hydra, for example, where you need 300, 400 accuracy. So getting those numbers up a little bit is definitely going to help out, of course. And the other champion inside here that I would recommend empowering if you can is Eurogrim. Eurogrim is a budget I can't remember the name. A budget Bad Alcazar. There we go. So attacking one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 75% chance of placing a 5% poison. Sorry, not 75. That's going to be 50%. Removes all debuffs from an ally, then heals them by 40% of their max HP on a 3-turn cooldown, and places 2 5% poison debuffs on all allies for 2 turns. Also an continuous heal on all allies for 2 turns. This is on a 4-turn cooldown. It was on a 3-turn cooldown when he was first announced, but they did nerf him, and a lot of people were very unhappy with that, which was unfortunate. And he's actually going to increase ally speed in all battles by 20%. This guy has some decent base stats: 19,000 HP, 1145 on the defense, 102 on the speed. Again, you've heard it a million times already, and I'm sure you've heard it a million times in other content creators' videos, which, by the way, I will say real quick, I have not watched them because I wanted this to be my own unique thoughts, not just copy-pasting what everybody else is saying on the internet. But getting stats on the empowerment, especially for a champion like this who's known to solo content, is going to be incredibly useful. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about which champions to keep. Huge shout out here to Maneater. Maneater could benefit from empowerment as well, since he can actually start doing more damage inside the clan boss if you have, obviously, more stats on him. Next up, we're going to Barbarians, which had no one. There was no one in here that I could justify putting on the top 25 list to empower. You could easily make a case for High Katoon. You could make a case for somebody like an Alika. You could make a case for a Skytouch Shaman, but at the end of the day, there was nobody on here that I could justify putting on that list. Even somebody like a Faharkin you could make a case for, but he's not really in that role where you're depending on him to be tanky and whatnot. Like, he's already deflecting 20% of all incoming damage he receives, so he's already quite tanky. So again, nobody inside the Barbarians makes it onto the must empower list. Over here inside Sacred Order, we have a couple of champions. So we have Godseeker and Neri. She is fantastic. Very low base HP though, good base defense. Getting her tanky even more so would be fantastic. She revives a dead ally with 50% HP, resets their skills. She attacks all enemies, heals everybody, then increases the duration of all debuffs, and decreases the duration of all buffs, and increases the duration of all buffs on all allies. She's healing somebody on the A1, and she has a passive Revive on Death here, so she's very good for soloing or duoing something like the Sand Devil, for example. And the other champion I would recommend empowering from this faction is going to be Phoenix. Phoenix still has one of the hardest hitting skills on his A1, plus, excuse me, a little bit of a burp there, but plus he's going to be placing a block revive if they're killed by this skill. So especially when we're going against, you know, Sun Wukong every time in the arena or something like that, having a block revive is going to be very, very nice. Decent base attack, decent base speed, getting those stats pumped up a little bit will help, of course. I believe we had one other one here. Yes, so we actually had 3 from this faction. So the next one is going to be Deacon Armstrong. Deacon is still very good. Ally speed in all battles. A1 has a leech. A2, AoE, big version of decreased defense. A3 is insane. Fills the turn meters of all allies by 15% and decreases the turn meters of all enemies by 15%, granting an extra turn on a 3-turn cooldown. So he's cycling through his skills incredibly fast. Next up, we are going over to the High Elves, and we are taking a look at one and only one champion, and that's going to be Skaramis. And you might say, why is Royal Guard not on the list? Why is Husk not on the list? They're such good champions, and they're being used in so many areas. They deserve to be on the list. Well, you might be right. However, these guys are known for doing enemy max HP damage, which it's not going to help getting them empowered. So when they're empowered, they're not going to be doing increased damage or anything like that. Like this attack scaling, for example, is very, very marginal when it comes to the overall damage that he does. And same thing with Husk. Husk is, I believe, HP based max HP damage dealer, but again, that HP part of it is such a small part, and we're on a top 25 list here, so we can't place champions like this who aren't even going to benefit that much from empowerment. So we have Skaramis instead. What does he do? 75% chance of placing a provoke on all enemies. That books up to a 100% chance. And then he places a counterattack and a continuous heal. Why is that important? Well, his A1 attacks one enemy, has a 90% chance of stealing 15% of the target's turn meter, has a 40% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn, 30% if the target's turn meter is fully depleted by this skill, which if he steals that turn meter, it is going to be fully depleted because they just took their turn. They have no turn meter. So he's basically just got a 30% chance of placing a stun. So this guy is basically like putting someone in a stun set times 2. He also attacks all enemies, decreasing the duration of all enemy buffs by 1 turn, and he has a 75% chance of placing a decreased attack, and he fills his turn meter by 10% for each buff that has its duration decreased. HP-based nuker as well, by the way, so as you're making him tanky, you're making him do more damage. Unfortunately, I don't have this guy on either of my accounts, but he is fantastic. It's here, the moment we've all been waiting for, the last champion to make the top 25 champion list, the epic to empower in my opinion, the champion that you want to have at the top of this list. Who is it going to be? Is it going to be Archmage Helmet? Is it going to be Stag Knight? Is it going to be somebody like Gizcard? Is it going to be Lady Annabelle? It's not. It's going to be Ursula the Mourner. Why is it Ursula the Mourner? Well, first of all, her reviews are fantastic, which in this case they are accurate. What does she do? Attacks one enemy, 55% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 10%. A2 attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance of placing a decrease attack for 2 turns, and she's placing an increase attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. Now, This next skill is really her money shot. This is where it's at. This is an AoE revive with 75% turn meter. Then, so 75% HP, then fills their turn meter by 50%. Not only that, she's also placing a increased defense and a strengthen on all allies for 3 turns. People sleep on this epic champion all the time. There is not many champions in the game that are doing a decrease attack and an increase attack plus an increased defense. So if you're trying to run somebody like a Harima or another defense-based nuker in the arena, you could definitely get use out of Ursala. You can build her in Stone Skin. Once everybody else dies, she can pop back with a revive with 50% turn meter and 75% HP. That is a ridiculous revive. Plus, she's buffing everybody up so that they're nice and tanky and ready to survive. Her base stats are definitely not the best, but she is going to benefit so much from empowerment. I do think it would be fun to try and run her in the arena if I get her empowered as well. I've only ever pulled one of her, unfortunately, though, so I don't think that's going to happen, but it might still be worth just throwing her in some Stone Skin to see how it will go. What do you guys think of the #1 pick? Do you think I was right? Would you have picked somebody else? We're close to 1,000 subscribers as well. Make sure you guys go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm going to go ahead and end the video here, though. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.